Hey guys, this is ADWCTA. Welcome back. This is part 2 of the Whispers of the Old God card review. We are trying to keep ourselves under 15 minutes per video. I totally failed last time because we did 5 cards in 15 minutes. So we're going to go a lot faster. But we did something very important last time, right? We covered taunts. And that is what's happening. If there is one thing that you take away from this meta review, it is that things are going to slow down and it will taunt. But taunt is not the only way things slow down and that you can play a little more conservatively and you can go a little more value oriented and you don't have to worry about your face as much. There are other ways that cards do that. And so Whispers of the Old Gods, being a slow expansion, is going to use all of that. So the second way that you will see cards slow the game down is just defensive cards, right? Tentacles of N'Zoth, for example, is Bad Sheep, and it's a bad card. You're not going to see it a lot, but what does it do? It's basically a mini board clear. Evolve Kobold, what does that do? It is a really bad card, 4 mana, 2/2. But it has +2 spell damage. That's a combo card, and it doesn't do that much, right? Like, you get 2 extra damage for the spell you're using. So you either have to have like multiple removals on the same turn, this 2/2 has to stay on the board for a while, or, and this is why it costs 4 mana, this is why it costs 2 extra mana than the regular Kobold, just to get +1 spell damage. Board clears, right? Imagine like Swipe. Imagine like Arcane Explosion. That's what this card is for. So again, control style kind of cards, but that doesn't make it good. It's a combo card. It's a combo card that has a really bad body. Anyway, Cult Apothecary. It's a slow card. It heals. It is going to be better than a heal bot in terms of the body, which is more important in Arena than the healing. But still, it heals, right? All defensive stuff. Corrupted Seer. This is an actual board clear. This is the first board clear that is a neutral card that we have. It's kind of crazy that this card exists. It's a rare card, so you're not going to see it that much, but it deals 2 damage to all non-Murloc minions, so it also affects both sides of the board, but it happens immediately. It's not an abomination. It's a consecration if you don't have the board attached to a body in which you don't lose any tempo by doing that. It's kind of insane. If you do have stuff on the board, you trade them into your opponent's minions and then you drop it. This is a very, very good card. And it doesn't have a rarity crystal on the art, so I think it's categorized as a rare. I'm gonna think it's a rare, but I may be reviewing a card that doesn't exist. This information is all really new, but regardless, it is a really, really good card, and it is a neutral board clear. That just doesn't happen. So you may be wondering, well, if this is such a really, really good card, is it better than the Bog Creeper? I don't think so, but this is what I mean by when we were reviewing the Psychotron before, that the Psychotron may be number 3 of the neutral cards, of the neutral, I guess this is rare, it's not common, but yeah, of the general neutral cards. Because Corrupted Seer is going to be very, very good. Don't get fooled by the fact that it deals 2 damage to all minions everywhere, because as you see with Hellfire and things like that, you can trade into stuff. It's not going to be as good as a Bog Creeper, definitely. Is it going to be as good as a Psychotron? I don't know. Well, we'll see. I need to think a little bit more about that. It is a 6 mana card, so Consecration happens a lot of times before that, but Consecration also happens in the late game. And this is just, it's very good value. Okay, so another way that cards, that the meta is going to slow down is because there's going to be a lot of big cards. And there's going to be a lot of big cards. They're not good, but you're just going to be offered them enough, and they're not god-awful. Like, this isn't Corehound here. You're going to take some of them eventually, especially if your deck is having these, like, Bog Creepers and all this other stuff that's, like, slowing you down anyway. So, we already did Bog Creeper. Let's look at Grotesque Dragonhawk. That extra attack, compare it to Wind Fairy Harpy. It gets 1 extra attack for 1 extra mana. Is that worth it? Probably not, but who cares if it's worth it or not? It's not going to be that much better, even if it is better, and it's not, it's worse. So it's bad. But Eldritch Horror is a card. It is a common card. It is a 6/10 for 8 mana. That's okay. We like that. It's fairly average-ish. You're going to see it, you're going to pick it, and hey, we got another really large card here. Faceless Behemoth. Behemoth. Wow, I totally screwed up that pronunciation. 10 mana, 10/10. Is it good? No, it's actually pretty bad. But it's not as bad as those unplayable cards. It's not a Windfury Harpy. It may be closer to Windfury Harpy than I think, now that I'm thinking more about it. Like 10 mana is like really late. But regardless, it's there. It's not totally unplayable. You're going to pick it sometimes. And all these just kind of go further to make you more incentivized to play a game in which it is slow. And then finally, Corrupted Healbot. It's a rare. It's not necessarily slow because 5 mana is kind of middling, and it is 6/6. So it is big, even though it's not that slow. It has a negative death rattle. And we've talked about this card before. It's definitely not as good as a Pit Fighter, even though tempoing out is generally a very good thing because the 8 health of the enemy hero really does matter. Okay, so we've covered different ways that things are going to be slow. They can taunt, they can be defensive in some ways, they can be big, but there are other ways to make cards slow. We're really going to go down every one of these cards, and I'm going to tell you why they're making the meta slow. It's ridiculously consistent. This is this expansion. Eater of Secrets. Why is it slow? It's situational. You got to wait for the secret, right? And when you have a faster deck, you want cards you can play. You want cards that you can put on the board so the minions can attack face. You want removals so that you can remove your opponent's minions and then your minions can go face, right? You can't do that with Eater of Secrets. You have to hold the card. It limits your options. So it's definitely more for a slow, more control kind of deck. And it is not as good. We also get less secrets. So you're going to see less secrets because there's no secrets in this entire expansion. Polluted Hoarder is card draw. This is a good card, right? It's like a Gnomish Inventor, but the 4/2 is better than the 2/4. So Gnomish Inventor, already pretty good. This is going to be better than that. It is a good card, and it is common, and you're going to see it a lot, and it draws a card. Slow, it's anti-tempo. And even Nerubian Prophet, right? Which is actually a very high tempo card. It is reduced by 1 mana for each turn it sits in your hand. So if you like top deck it, you don't care about the mana, so you just play it. And on the other hand, if you get it early, you can just it's a dead card for a while, but starting on turn 3, if you have it in your opening hand, you can play a 4/4. That's pretty good. More likely, you're just going to keep it in your hand until it's turn 6, and it's just free. You just get a free 4/4 onto the board, which is ridiculous. But it's slow, right? You don't get the effect until it's turn 6. And more likely, you're going to pick it up somewhere in mid-game, and you're just going to hold it like a dead card for a while. So it is a good card. It's not an amazing, ridiculous card, because having a dead card in your hand actually does kind of screw you up a lot, especially if you're a good player. You want options, right? You can't be a good player if you have no options, because then you do the same thing as a bad player would. And this limits your options. So it's definitely a card that kind of goes against your skill. But it's a good card, and it's slowing down the meta, right? Because you have to hold it, which means you have to be alive, which means you have to keep playing this game. So at this point, you may be wondering, hey, ADWCTA, why are you cherry picking all the slow cards? Maybe this meta is not really as slow as you say it is, and instead it is actually balanced, and you are just not telling us about all the curve cards. Kind of true. There are actually a decent number of curve cards in this meta. If you're looking at the curve, it's not as bad as we kind of feared, right? There's 2 1-drops. Technically, 1-drops are not really on the curve, and these are not very good 1-drops. There's 3 2-drops. Technically, again, one of the 2-drops is totally awful, and the other ones aren't anything to write home about either. There's 1 3-drop, which is a nice solid 3-drop. 2 4-drops, technically pretty bad, and the card draw on the Corrupted Loot Hoarder is not considered a drop because it's so anti-tempo. And then there's 1 5-drop. It's going to make you curve out a little less frequently, but not anywhere near going back to where Classic was, right? We're still well above Classic, or even above Nax in terms of how we curve out, which is good, because curving out makes the game more steady. And there's nothing worse, right? It's like being land screwed in Magic the Gathering. There's nothing worse than just sitting there and being like, oh, I'm going to lose because I didn't draw my 2 and I didn't draw my 3. So I definitely like that there are curves. But just because there's curves doesn't mean it's not defensive. Doesn't mean that they're not more slow-based cards. Because a whole ton of these curve cards are either so bad that you're never going to see them, or they are defensive in nature. So let's start. Go right down the list, from the small ones to the big ones. Tentacle of N'Zoth. We already did it. It's a control card. It could be played on turn 1 and it'll deal 2 damage, but in the late game, it's also good. So a lot of its value comes not in the early game, but in the late game. Then, Zealous Initiate. It's a 1-drop, and you can... So this card, I think a lot of people think it's like a lot better than it is, and a lot of people think it's worse than it is. It's kind of hard to value. But the idea is you play it on turn 1. On turn 2, you don't kill anything, you just like damage something. So if you put a 2/3 out, or a 3/2 out, it doesn't matter, right? Like, you throw it into your opponent's minion. And then, unless your opponent has a 3/2 and you also have a 3/2, on any other combination, you are able to then kill your opponent's minion and then have something with either 3 attack or 4 attack left on the board, which is, very good for your board. That's how it should work, and in that case, it's a very good tempo card. But you're most likely going to get this much later in the game. And much later in the game, this card really doesn't do much, because you can't really control where you get the +1/+1 on. Your opponent, if they have the board, this just doesn't do anything. It kind of goes away. Or your opponent can kind of pop it, let it go on the minion they want it to go on, and then kill it in the same way. So it's kind of a pretty bad late game card, even if it's a decent 1-drop. And that means overall it's bad. You're not going to see it all that much, is kind of my point. Twisted Worgen is the next card we're going to talk about, and it is a defensive card like everything else. It's an offensive card too. It has stealth. It's a 3/1 stealth. You know how good 3/2 stealths are from Druid of the Saber. 3/1 stealth, almost as good. Kind of, susceptible to like bombers and arcane stuff and random things. But generally speaking, the 3/2 is not living anyway, right? You're just going to keep it there and then save it until it hits something and removes them for 3 damage. So in that sense, it's still a good card, right? It's a great 2-drop. But it's also very defensive, because you can set up board clears by putting stealth minions down, and then your opponent can't do anything, and then you board clear, right? And if you don't have initiative and you want some initiative, you put down a stealth minion. Well, next turn, you're pretty much guaranteed to have the initiative with that minion. So it's still a defensive play card. It can also be offensive. Stealth can also be reach that your opponent can't remove. The idea isn't that this expansion is going to totally wreck mid-range and aggro. It's more that this expansion just expands the world of control so heavily. And whereas before it was kind of hard to play control, you may be able to make a good control deck 1 out of every 5 or 6 arenas. It's going to be a lot easier to make control decks now. Because everything taunts, and then you have stuff like this. We already did Biofen Tidehunter, taunt, right? Squirming Tentacles, taunt. Good curve cards, but they're defensive. Infested Tauren, taunt. All right, Aberrant Berserker. This is a very, very special card. And this is a very special card because it is the only card, literally the only card that's a common or rare in Whispers of the Old Gods that is not defensive. That is not slow or defensive or helps a control game. And even that's a little questionable because 3/5 is kind of good for control. But it's not overtly so. And this card is a 4-mana 3/5, and it has an Enrage +2 attack. So it starts out as a 3/5, which is not that great, but then it hits something and it's probably going to survive. Very few things at that point that you're going to play a 3/5 will be able to remove it. And then it has 5 attack to hit the next thing, which can be very useful. So this is actually going to be a pretty decent 4-drop. You see how Amani Berserker is really a good 2-drop, despite needing something below 2 attack to attack into. This thing only needs something below 4 attack to attack into. And yeah, sure, it gains +2 attack, not +3 attack, but it still gets that vital 5 damage. So it's going to be quite a good card. Midnight Drake, again, bad. It's a 5/4 on a good day. More attack is really not as good as more defense like the other Drake. And these days, oftentimes it'll only be a 4/4 or something. So, I mean, it's not bad enough that you won't see it, but it's not good. And then we also did Cyclotron, which is a drop. Like I said, it trades evenly with everything, and it stops aggro. But again, slow, right? So even our curve cards are still defensive in nature. They may be good for the curve so that you can curve out, but they're also good off curve as defensive plays. It just opens up the world of defense. This is kind of the theme of Whispers of the Old Gods, and we're still sticking with it. Okay, so now you may be wondering, okay, ADWCTA, you have gone through all the cards except for 4. Why did you skip 4 cards? Did they not fit your theme? Are you trying to structure a narrative that is completely false because you just pick cards? You're just cherry picking your cards. No, I'm going to get to these 4 cards right now. 1, and I skipped them because they're just bad. They're just so bad that 1, they're not going to be in the meta, and 2, they're so bad by being understated that in itself is slow, right? If you spend 4 mana to play a 2/2, that's slow. Spawn of N'Zoth. It's an awful card. We talked about how bad it is. You don't get to control where it triggers unless you are already winning so hard that it doesn't even matter. That your opponent will just destroy you and you just lost like 1.5 tempo. So very bad. The backwards Magma Rager. I'm not even trying to pronounce that. Right? Is it even? I didn't even consider it a 3-drop. It's a 1/5. It's so bad. Silithid Swarmer. Half the classes it could like not even ever attack. It's like another watcher or whatever, right? Like, I don't know if it's fast or slow in a warrior or a rogue or something, but regardless, generally speaking, it is just not a card. But really though, in rogue, it's quite good. It's 3 mana, 3/5, and you're almost always going to have a weapon, and it's not that bad to get a weapon when you're going to attack. And it's definitely still playable in other classes that have weapons, but it gets a lot worse because it's conditional attack. And finally, the last card, the very last common or rare card, getting through it, is Blackwater Pirate. Which again, is not very good. It's a 2/5. We talked about how bad 2/5s are. And once again, there's a weapon kind of thing going on with it. Your weapons cost 2 mana less. Rogues don't really have a lot of weapons. It's a big warrior thing. Other classes like Shaman or Paladin get a little bit of a benefit. If you're using the 2 mana less, then yes, it is good. You've gained 1 mana. If you don't use the 2 mana less, then it's awful. And even if you do use the 2 mana less, it's still just like 2/5 is a really awkward stat distribution on turn 4. So your weapon just kind of supplements it. If you're in a weapons class, this is fine. Like, it's not the worst card in the world. It's below average, but it's not the worst card in the world. If you're in any other class, it's far below average. I mean, if you have a deck that has a lot of weapons, right, it can become good. But just average, like generally speaking, in a Paladin or a Shaman, you'd rather take a 2-drop than this. In a Warrior, I think you might take this over a 2-drop just for the 1 extra tempo, and Warrior is very big on tempo. But that's like the one special case. Overall, bad, right? These cards are bad, and these cards are bad for tempo, and so they're slow if you play them. Okay, I think I made my case crystal clear about just how slow this meta is, and just how every card allows you to play defense compared to their neutral variants. Sorry, not neutral, compared to their vanilla variants. So that's where we are now in the Whispers of the Old God meta. It is going to be slow and very defensive. And if you like a defensive control style play, you're going to love it. You're going to love it because you have all of these cards made for you. And they are going to have that offering rate bonus. And you're going to be able to stop aggro dead with all the taunts. Okay, that's it for me on the rares and common neutral cards. You guys know where the meta's going now. You guys know what card to watch out for. You guys know that Bog Creeper is the best card and it will completely shape the meta, which will be interesting. Like, we've really never had anything like it. Patrons on the left, thank you guys for supporting us, and I will catch you on the next video when we will talk about epics.